When you have a quick question about your deployments, or you need to understand what just shipped to production, or even trace changes from source control to release for compliance purposes, you typically end up navigating through many pages in your tools, and often jumping between multiple tools to correlate information. You're checking Octopus for deployment status, switching to GitHub to see commit details, opening your observability tool to look for errors, and maybe even checking Slack for team communications. Each of these tools have their own interface and their own way of querying data, and stitching it all together manually takes time. So what if you could just ask questions in natural language and get answers that pull from all of these systems at once? Well, that's one of the promises of the Model Context Protocol, or MCP, and today I'd like to explore Octopus Deploy's MCP Server. The Octopus MCP Server connects your AI assistant, whether that's Claude, ChatGPT, or your IDE, directly to your Octopus instance. You can ask questions in natural language about deployments, releases, and configurations, and get instant answers. Because it uses the Model Context Protocol, or MCP, it can work alongside other MCP servers to pull information from sources like GitHub, from your monitoring tools, and honestly, many other services, all in the same conversation. I've got a few examples to show you, but before I do, I want to let you know that we do have installation documentation in the README of our GitHub repo for the Octopus MCP server, showing you how to install it using both Docker and Node, as well as the configurations you need to integrate it with your AI client of choice. I do also want to quickly point out that right now we are providing this as a local MCP server that you run on your device. And if I go to the bottom, we do have plans for releasing a remote MCP server that will be hosted on the Octopus server side. And if that's of interest to you, check out the roadmap item here and register that interest for the team so they're aware. Let me show you this in action. I'm using Claude Desktop for the demo, and I've already completed the installation using a Docker container. Let me show you the tools in Claude, and if I expand Octopus Deploy, you can see all the tools we have available today provided by the MCP server. These are all currently read-only tools, and I've configured them in my Claude configuration to not prompt for approval to execute each tool, but by default it will. I'll paste in a prompt where I'm telling Claude that in my Octopus instance there's a space for Kubernetes deployments with examples. I'd like to find the latest production deployment that users customize for the front end and tell me the result of the deployment, and then get me the live status of the Kubernetes objects that were targeted with the deployment. Notice in my language I'm staying pretty general, and that's on purpose. I'm not giving it specific Octopus space or project names or even release versions. You can of course be more specific if you need to be, and you can refine that in future prompts. But here it works through finding the right space, the correct project, and retrieves the production deployment I was looking for. It gives me some information about the deployment and, importantly, the result, which was successful. And as I scroll down, a feature we have in Octopus Deploy when deploying to Kubernetes is that it can retrieve the live status of the Kubernetes components after the deployment has completed. Here it retrieves the live object status for components like the cluster IP, the deployment, and the ingress, which are all showing as healthy and synchronized. Now, that example was getting information just from Octopus, which in itself was valuable and otherwise would have taken me a few minutes in the UI to track down, so that's cool. But like I said at the start, a primary benefit of MCP is the ability to connect multiple MCP servers to your AI client and then query across those servers in a single chat interface. One of the many tools we created and developed is the Octopus CLI, which is a multi-platform command line interface tool used to manage and operate Octopus Deploy. I want Claude to go and get the most recent deployment of the CLI project to the production environment, then find the corresponding tag in the GitHub repository for that release, and give me some information from both tools, including a summary of the deployment status and information about the changes that were included in the commits in that release. Again, I've left some of the instructions a bit vague, so it goes through the discovery process of finding the relevant project in the Octopus instance and getting the deployment information. And if I scroll down a bit, here's the cool part. It then went over to GitHub using GitHub's MCP server and used the information that it retrieved from Octopus to go and find the relevant release in GitHub and inspect the commits that were included in that release. As I scroll down to the results, it tells me some information about the deployment, including that it was successfully deployed to package repositories like Chocolatey, Homebrew, apt, and Winget, and then goes on to detail what changes were included in this release and who the primary developers were. That's just one pretty straightforward example, but imagine you could now further expand this across more tools. You could query your observability platform to see if there were any error spikes after the deployment went live, or check your incident management system to see if any support tickets were opened around the same time, or even pull from your project management tool to confirm which user stories were included in that release. This is where MCP really shines, which is breaking down silos between those DevOps tools in a single conversation. I asked questions that required pulling data from both Octopus and GitHub, and my AI client coordinated between both MCP servers to give me complete answers. I didn't have to manually look up information in Octopus and then copy values, then search for them in GitHub. The tooling handled that orchestration for me. Now, our MCP server is available to start using with your client of choice today, so go ahead and try it out and make sure to let us know what you think. I'll include more references and documentation down below. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.